Have you ever tried to create a pivot table from monthly data where the monthly values are spread across different columns and Excel just won't play nice? That's because it's in wide format. In this video, I'll show you a simple fix using VBA to convert that wide format data into a nice long format that Excel loves. So on the left-hand side, we've got the problem data. Now we've used this before in previous videos where we've looked at unpivoting with Power Query, Python and formulas. So hopefully you're familiar with the layout now. We've got teams down the left-hand side. We've got our goals going across the columns by our months, and those relate to the goals scored per month. So the output we're looking for to make this nice and easy to work with pivot charts and tables is this unpivoted format that we see here, where we've got a nice clean 3-column stack of teams, months and goals. So to do that in this video, we're going to look at using a solution with Visual Basics. Now Visual Basics will allow us to execute some code which will automatically output the desired result in this cell. So to do that, first of all, we need to make sure we've got the developer ribbon enabled. If you don't have that enabled, then you've likely not used macros before, and I suggest you check out my introductions to VBA macros video, which will really help you understand the principles here. So to enable the developer ribbon, we're going to go to customize the ribbon by right-clicking anywhere on the ribbon, and then we're just going to go on the right-hand side and we're going to make sure the developer tab is ticked. As soon as that's ticked, we can click OK. You'll have the developer ribbon here, and then we can enter the Visual Basics editor using this icon, or use the keyboard shortcut Alt and F11. So we've got some code set up here. Rather than writing it out, I'm just going to take you through all the lines one by one. So the first thing you'll need to do is you'll need to create a module. So on the left hand side within the right workbook, you can right click on the workbook name, you can go to Insert and insert a module. That'll create a new module for you. And then within that module, you'll have some blank space to start writing your subroutine. Every subroutine will start with sub and then the name of the sub. This can be anything. So I'll just put example name. And then we need to open and close brackets like that. And then if we press enter, you can see now we've got end sub automatically added. Anything in between the subroutine start name and the end sub is code that's going to get executed. So now we've got the basics out the way. If we head back over to module 1, I'm just going to click on it, and down the left hand side here I'm going to give it a more useful name than module 1. I'm going to call this Unpivot. And then if we actually click on that Unpivot module now, so let's start from the top. We've got a subroutine with the name Unpivot, and then the first 4 lines of code all start with dim. So what does dim mean in VBA? Dim is nothing more than defining what our variable types are. So you can see if we go down slightly, we have a variable here called TBL. So that's just an abbreviation for table. And that variable has been set using the set command, and it's been set equal to this list object. So for VBA to know how to work with that variable and the output of that variable, you have to declare what that object type is. And you can see, therefore, this first row is doing nothing more than saying set TBL, our variable name, as a list object. This list object, by the way, is T_data3. So if I just pull the window down slightly, and if we have a look at our data, if I click on this table within Excel and go to the table design ribbon, you can see this table is actually called tdata3. And that's the reason why we're referring to a list object called tdata3, because list objects are what tables are within Excel. Before the list objects, you can see sheet.3. Sheet.3 is simply the code name of the worksheet that we're working with that list object. So on sheet 3, which is called VBA, but I'm not calling it by its actual Excel name here, VBA, I'm calling it by its code name because that can't be changed, whereas the sheet name in Excel could be changed from VBA, and that would cause the code to fall over if we referred to that. So that's always safer to refer to code names within the workbook if you can. The next variable we're working with, we've called out start, and that's just short for output start range. Call that whatever you like. Maybe you'd like to call it start in cell. And then we've defined that variable sheet 3 again, because it's this worksheet we want it on. And we're saying O is output, the output of this code, which will be the unpivoted data, starting in cell K3. Now Excel needs to know what this variable type is. So then we go back up to the start of the code where we declared our variable types. And you can see dim out start is declared as a range because we've stated cell K3, which is a range. Now, we always want to make sure that when we're outputting the contents of our unpivot using the code, that we're starting off in a blank space where there's no other data. So this line of code, we're saying work with sheet 3 again. Then we're saying we're going to use a range. And within that range, we're declaring out start, which is nothing more than cell K3, what we defined above. And then we're going to offset that by 1,000 rows and 2 more columns. So we'll get 1,001 rows and 3 columns. And then we're simply going to clear the contents of that range. So that gives us our clean starting point. So what we could do is, at this point, we've already got data here. You can see we've got an output of the unpivot. So let's just digest what we've gone through. I'm just going to press F8 to execute this code line by line. And then we're going to go through to that clear step. So you can see we're highlighted on the clear step that we've just talked about. As soon as I press F8 on that, you can see the contents of the previous unpivot output from this code have now disappeared. And that's what that line's there to do. So I'm just going to press stop so that we can go back into reading what's going on. Now the next step is we're going to use the out start again, which remember was nothing more than cell K3. And we're going to resize a range by 1 row and 3 columns. And we're going to say dot value. So we're declaring the value for that single row 3 column range. And we're saying that is going to be the array contents of TBL, which if you remember was our table range. Table.list columns 1, so that's index position 1 within the table column headers, so that's going to give us team. So we're going to pull team as our first item within the array, and then our second item within that 3 column array we're defining as hard-coded month, and then the third as value. Might just change that to goals. So we could go back into the code, press F8, down to there, and you can see that's given us that output of team month goals. Then the next line of code, we're going to declare the output row, and we're saying that the output row is equal to the out start row, which was nothing more than K3 at the beginning, plus 1. So at this point, that out row is going to become row 4, because it's saying start with row 3 and add on 1. Next up, we're into the loop section where we're going to start stacking those teams, months and goals row by row to create that unpivoted range. To do a loop within VBA, we can use the for function and then I equals 1. So that's just saying I, which we declared at the top here as long, which just means a number. So we're saying start at number 1 for our loop, and then do it all the way to the end of table.listrows.count. So table, if you remember, was our output here, and then listrows.count will give us the number of rows within that table. And now we're saying an inner loop here for J again, we've declared as long, so nothing more than a number. 2, again, the table.listcolumns.count, this time to table.listcolumns.count. So this is going to give us the number of columns within that table. And then to better visualize what's going on here, I'm just going to execute the code and we're going to go through one step of the loop. So we're starting off for I1. You can see if I hover over I equals 1 and J equals 2. So they're just the starting declarations that we've given. Column offset, we're saying is 0. Now, this is where we're going to start defining the teams. So we're saying output start, remember we're at K3. Then we're saying offset that by the output row. You can see when I hover over that, that's row 4 minus the first row, which was row 3. So that's going to give us 1. So we're going to offset K3 by 1 cell. And then we're going to offset the column by 0 because we declared the offset column as 0 as a starting point. And then we're going to pull the value. And then we're going to say that value of that cell, which would be K4, is equal to the table. And when we use data body range, that excludes the headers of our list object. So we're just going to pull Manchester City, row 1, because I is starting at 1 in our loop, and column 1. So you can see when I press F8 on that, we correctly pull Man City because we were pulling from row 1 and column 1 within our table data body range. Next up for the month, you can see it's using a similar concept. The only difference is the column offset is pushing in +1. So that will allow us to move one column to the right. And instead of using the data body range, you can see we're using the header row range 1 and J. So header range row 1, J2. So that's going to give us Jan. So when we press F8 on that, we get the Jan. Next off, we're on to the value step of the loop. Similar to the above, except we're going to add on 2 so that we step over to the goals element of our output array. And then we're going to say that will be equal to the table body range. So we're back to the body range only of this. We're saying I, which I equals 1. So that'll be row 1. So Man City's row, and then J. If you remember, J equals 2 in the first loop. So that's going to pull 1 for January. Press F8, you can see the 1 comes in. Now here's the important part. At the end of that loop, we're saying that output row equals output row plus 1. So output row is currently 4. If we add 1 onto 4, we're going to get row 5. That's going to bring us down to the next row so that we start working on the next row in this output. So next J just continues on through this inner loop. Now you can see we're back into here. And this time our output row is row 5 because we're still working with Man City. So we press F8. And our next row, we want to pull February instead. So you can see here where we're doing the header row range, we're actually picking up J is equal to 3 now, because that next J at the end of the loop, we started with J equals 2. As soon as we've cycled through that J loop once, next J adds 1 on. So J becomes 3 in this loop. In the next loop, J will become 4 and so on. And here you can see we're using that J variable to step through the columns one by one. So if we press F8 here again, we're going to get Feb. And then moving on to the next row, we're passing in J again, which means we're going to get that third column from the first row. So we'll get the 2 goals. I'm just going to press F8 through all of this first J loop. Now this J loop is going to continue. I'm just going to pull this down. This J loop will continue until we've got Man City up to July. So this July, that should be the last entry now on that J loop. So now when we press F8 down to here, next J, you can see actually it's stepped out of the J loop, that inner loop, because it knows it's done to the end of the columns for that first row. And it was stepping into the outer loop, which was I. So next I, we're still on I1. As soon as we go to that and we hover over that, you can see now we're on I2. We go down into our first row for the teams. And if we have a look, we're looking at the table body range, and this time we're pulling row 2 and column 1. So that's why we're going to get Liverpool now that we've stepped into the second loop of I. And there we go, Liverpool. And we're going to be heading back to J, because we've went through that J loop all the way to July, where J would have been +7 on the 2. Now you can see if we hover over J, we're back to 2, which is going to pull Jan again. And then we're going to pull the goals for Jan. And then we'll keep cycling through that inner J loop for Liverpool, exactly as we did for Man City, until we get to the end. And then you can see again, we step out of the inner loop and move back. And now I becomes 3. And that will allow us to pick up Arsenal and cycle through all the columns for Arsenal. At that point, we can press F5 to continue executing. And you can see it's added on all the Arsenal entries for Jan to July and the goals. And then it's given us a nice pop-up saying that the unpivot action is complete. Now if we step back into the code, the reason we got that message box at the end is because in VBA, if you declare message box, you can then put in double quotes a message to be displayed within Excel, just to let the user know the macro is completed. And then there's nothing more after that other than end sub, which means end the subroutine, because all the code is executed completely. So let's just wrap this up with a nice easy way to run the macro. We're going to go to Insert, Shapes. We're going to go for a text box. I'm just going to put it in here, unpivot in cell K3. And then I'm going to right click on that text box. I'm going to click Assign Macro, and we're going to assign the unpivot macro we've just built. So click OK. I'm just going to delete this to help with the illustration. I'm going to click the box, and then you can see that code is quickly executed and given us the prompt to say it's complete. Of course, you could take this step further. You could assign this macro to a quick access toolbar or even a ribbon button. I've done videos on how to do this previously, so check those out. And you could even make this more dynamic so that the output isn't always in K3. At the start of the macro, we could say a prompt, which allows the user to type in a cell address. Let me know in the comments if you want to cover those sorts of topics in future. And that's it. That's how easy it is to unpivot with VBA and Excel. Simple lines of code that can be reused over and over again for dynamic sizes of data. Let me know in the comments what you'd like to cover next. Hit that thumbs up button if you found it useful. Please subscribe for weekly updates, and I'll see you again next week. Thank you for watching.